This is Andrew. Andrew is cool and has good taste in furniture. He's our carpenter here at Jeff Mack Designs, and he doesn't complain much, if at all. But Andrew works in different positions every day, some awkward, some not. We're not sure if his back ever really hurts, but figured it would be nice for him to sit once in a while. Inspired by minimalist Japanese furniture, ancient mortise and tenon joinery, and a random perfectly tall bar stool on which Andrew sat and noted its height, he exercised that good taste of his and designed a beautiful three-legged stool to use in the shop. We started by finding your average stool dimensions and tweaked them from there. We went with a 14-inch round top, so we made a circular template out of plywood on our CNC machine. You could use a jig on a bandsaw as an alternative though. We finished cutting it out and flush trimmed it on our router table. We laid it down on our walnut slab and cut it down to a workable size.
Places we used to go.
Using some double-sided tape, we stuck it on and started routing out the shape.
When the man left me, I was in misery. Want him to bring it on home to me. I still love it.
Once we maxed out our cutting depth, we sent the rest through the bandsaw. To finish off the round, we used our giant flush trim cutter and got our piece perfectly round, all 14 inches. This brings us to our first jig. We wanted to include a big taper on the underside of the stool. There really isn't an easy way of doing this or a specific tool that can safely hog out the material to taper an edge, so making this jig was our best bet. We cut some plywood into strips and figured out what would work for our router. There are no specific measurements for this, so if you're looking to achieve the same effect, you can follow our idea and make it work for your setup. That's what we did. We used a brad nailer to secure the pieces, starting with the section the router will glide along. We cut two wedge-shaped pieces at the angle we wanted our taper and then fastened a base plate, which actually ended up being a problem. Our router did not have a long enough shank to reach the full taper amount. The jig was too thick, so we took it off the base plate and secured it to the center of our piece with a screw. We took our time making small passes with straight twin flute bit as we rotated around the stool top. This took quite some time, but was well worth it. Next up, we'll show you how we concaved the top and made one of these. We started by taping the freshly tapered side of the stool top down to our work table. Building our second jig, we were able to use our CNC to cut some perfect concave shapes that would act as the router guide. You could still cut something similar by hand, but for efficiency and being well past Y2K, we chose to use computers. We cut two pieces of plywood slightly taller than our stool top, which would sandwich the concave router pieces. We glued them together and fired in a couple brad nails. We then marked the maximum distance our router could travel along the concaves and milled some end stops for the jig, which we secured with some screws. With everything set, we started cutting away material. This took a lot of passes at different depths. It was a huge mess and ended up being pretty time consuming, but totally worth it. We finished it off by sanding out the rough cut lines and moved on to drilling out the mortises for the legs. We set up our drill press on a 12-degree angle and clamped some stop blocks to the drill bed. The legs would flare out away from the stool top and the tenons needed to be around an inch in diameter. We set up a Forstner bit and started drilling our way through the piece. This stool is getting 3 legs, so we repeated this process 2 more times. We added a little chamfer to the leg holes on the underside to help seat the legs.
I said D is for delicious.
For these, we had 1.5-inch walnut dowels in our shop that we would cut tenons from. Using a crosscut sled and stopper, we set our table saw blade to barely remove any material and carefully spun the dowels around.
I can speak for everybody, honey, you pleasing me.
Our stopper block helped to keep them all the same distance, even though they'd be cut and sanded down to the stool's surface later. This was a bit sketchy and not how table saws are intended to be used, so we have to recommend doing this step a different way. We slid the dowels side to side as we cut the tenons to make sure they were perfectly rounded. This also took a bit of time as we moved slowly. The tenons fit snugly into the top, so we marked out the angle by sliding a pencil along the bottom side of the stool. This would transfer the exact contour onto the legs, showing us where to cut and chisel away material. We got as close as we could with a handsaw, then cleaned everything up by hand. To secure these firmly into the stool top, they needed a wedge, much like a hammer or axe head is held onto its handle. To do this, we set up our bandsaw with the dowels along the fence and carefully cut down the middle of the tenon. You'll want to pay attention to the wood grain here, as cutting with as opposed to perpendicular can cause a weak joint. It's good practice to drill a small hole at the end of the cut to reduce the chances of cracking. We found some granadillo blocks and cut some angled wedges on our chop saw, then finished off the cutting to the proper width on the bandsaw so they would fit inside the mortise and tenon joints. Now, with the legs fitting perfectly, it was time to glue it all together. We brushed a liberal amount of wood glue onto the stool top, and then slid the legs into place. Before adding the wedges, we coated them in glue along with the slots that they are going to live in. We carefully used a wooden mallet to beat them into place. You'll want to make sure you don't drive them in too deep with too much force to avoid any possible cracking. Clean up the mess you just made and let it all dry. Come back with a saw and trim down the excess flush to the stool top. This brings us to our next jig, if you even want to call it that. We use the same size Forstner bit in a plywood cutoff, which the leg slides into firmly. This allows us to drag our saw along its surface to cut the legs at the perfect angle. You'll want to hold on to the offcuts though, as they provide a perfect spacer to tape back in when you're cutting the other legs. If you skip this, you'll end up with one wobbly stool. With everything assembled and cut, we gave it a final sand and broke all the rough edges, and Andrew thought it would look fantastic with a small round over, which he was right about. We rubbed on our favorite finish, Rubio Monocoat, making sure it got a good soak. The end grain of the tenons ended up quite dark, which makes it a little difficult to spot the granadillo wedges. All in all, this little stool turned out great. For a fairly small and simple project, this stool had its challenges. From jig figuring to angle measuring, it proved to be quite a stimulating build. If you're up to it, we think you should give one of these a shot. We've already explained most of the head scratches for you anyway. Hit that subscribe button, as it helps us make projects like this, and thanks for watching.